Welcome. My name is Tom Dickelman, and with me today are the Reverend Sean Miller and Dr. Matt Duar, and together we are pleased to welcome you to A Spirited Take. Now it's Thanksgiving season, and so we are thinking about gratitude. Additionally, I'm preaching on it this Sunday and still need some material. So we're going to be talking about gratitude, and we'd like to begin with Matt. Matt, how would you define gratitude?
Great question, Swami. I would say that gratitude is a counterweight to our innate tendencies to be self-centered and to see the negative in life, our negativity bias. And I think we have these two fundamental filters where we kind of because we are the subject of our own experience, we tend to have this bias that everything is about us. And in addition to that, we tend to always look for the negative. As researchers say, our minds are like Teflon to positive experiences and Velcro to negative. And so gratitude is this wonderful way of kind of creating this existential counterweight to the pole of these two tendencies, and it brings us back into a more adaptive perception and understanding of our lives. And I think because I think for most people gratitude doesn't come naturally, so I think it's definitely a practice. It's a capacity we need to build through time and effort. So
you would say it's definitely a spiritual practice.
Absolutely. It might even be the most spiritual practice.
How would you define gratitude, Sean?
The feeling when Tom's sermon is done. But in all seriousness, folks.
You are serious. That's the problem.
That is the Velcro
awesome.
to the negative experience. Gratitude, for me, it belongs on the periodic table of elements of what it means to be a human being. And the more human we are, the more grateful we are, I think. And so when we have little kids, we constantly say to them, what do you say? What do you say? What do you say? Because we're training them to say thank you all the time. Because there's something in us that knows one of the first things we have to teach our kids is gratitude, because that's just elemental to what it means to be a person in the world. So I love that, Matt. I love the counterbalance idea away from selfishness. And I think actually, even though it is Thanksgiving, but we are living in a time where it is so easy every day to say the things for which we are not thankful, that it's almost like every day the spiritual practice has to be to fill up the other side of the scale, to add, to balance out all the things for which we are grateful. And there should be many, many. Sermon over.
So it seems like there's two parts to this, really. There's affirming something that's happening, and also recognizing that it comes from outside ourselves, which I think is the whole ego piece that you mentioned. And I've been thinking about parents who are working and trying to develop their children to have a sense of gratitude that's authentic. And it's not just about the automatic, have you, sent your thank you to grandma for sending you $20 for Christmas kind of thing. How do you teach your children to develop a sense of gratitude, or to have that practice be real in their life? Any thoughts?
Tell grandma to step it up to, never mind. Go ahead.
Step it up to $50,
exactly.
And the kids will be more likely to respond.
Inflation,
Nice.
Hello. Anyway.
Matt, what do you say about that, whether it's for children or for adults developing the practice of gratitude?
I think practicing it in a visible way is the most instructive way to do it. In the education space, I often say to colleagues that more than with the content of any lesson plan, you teach with who and how you are. And so gratitude is something that you practice with who and how you are. And when you are able to do that in a way that is visible and in the presence of a young adult or a child, they see through the very act of you doing it that it's something worth doing and that it's something important.
So it's modeling?
Absolutely, 100%. And I would say my mother, this was one of her great strengths, is that she, we would be driving in the car and she would just, it might be around sunset and she would just notice and articulate, look how beautiful that sunset is. I'm so grateful for that. How special is it that we can sit here and look at this sunset? And she would say things like this, and then that just kind of calibrates, or it calibrated my mind to start organizing my perception of reality in that way and be like, oh yeah, sunsets are really spectacular. Or someone would provide something or give something, or we would go to a homeless shelter. That was something she was also, another strength of hers, was that she brought us to homeless shelters and soup kitchens. And then on the way home, she would say, so thankful to be going back to a home. And so these things you take for granted, these everyday things that are so close to you that they kind of become invisible, you just expect that they're supposed to be there. When you practice gratitude, you realize nothing is supposed to be anything. And if it is, present, if you do have a home, if you do have a job, if you do have clothes, if you do have good health, it could be otherwise. And that's what the beauty of gratitude is. It allows you to see through these kind of these blind spots that you create through just expecting reality to be a certain way, and you realize it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And the fact that it is pretty special. And so you should acknowledge that that it's a blessing.
Sean, how do you think about gratitude as an element or component of faith?
Well, to build off what Matt was just saying, I think the next step from realizing all the ways in which we ought to be grateful are to realize then all the ways in which we have more than other people. Because that's just a natural extension of thank you for this beautiful home and thank you for what I have. And when we teach our children about to thank you for my toys and thank you, the next thing to talk about is the reality of people who don't have what we have and to how then to serve. So there's a faith component for me that is an extension of gratitude that leads to service, which I think is really important. The other thing I think about all the time with gratitude is that the early Christians, when they got together for that meal, they called it Eucharisto, and that means thanksgiving. That means thank you. So that communion meal literally was their way to say thank you, to come together for a meal. And that's what people of faith do. We share our food, we cook for one another, we bring a casserole dish, we make cookies, and that is just another extension of gratitude. So I guess from a faith perspective, what starts with gratitude leads then to service. It leads then to Sunday morning, to worship. It leads to devotion, all from that inner core of being grateful.
Tom, I just want to follow up real quick on what Sean just said. I totally agree, and I think that gratitude ultimately, as you start to practice it, it invites you into a deeper engagement with life. Because if you start to realize all the things that are supporting you in your existence that you no longer take for granted, things like health, sunlight, clean water, a warm home, you start to realize that these are blessings. And it makes you more inclined to then return the favor, to pay it forward, to be, it basically awakens you in some way to the interdependency of life. And that because you are blessed to have things that are extended to you, then you're more likely then to extend certain considerations to others, because gratitude is ultimately, there's a part of it where you're recognizing how you're benefiting, but then you're channeling that benefit into trying to be better for other people and trying to be of service to other people. And I think that's a real important piece.
Yeah, well said. It's it kind of begins in some ways with that strongly Eastern notion of just paying attention and being aware. And I think the more aware we are of what's going on around us and in our lives, no matter what our situation, we can't help but recognize that there are blessings. As I thought about this topic of gratitude, it reminded me of a friend of mine who's been a dear friend for over 50 years. He's a PhD psychologist, and a year ago he wrote me a note, and he said, "Tommy, you have the gift of gratitude." And I thought about that, and because I love this guy whose name is Charlie, I paid attention to it and I listened to it, and I was so glad to hear that from him. But it struck me that isn't gratitude not a gift but a choice? And I thought about it some more, and as I did, I realized that that gratitude is kind of woven in at the most basic level of my faith. And if I were to describe to someone my faith or tell them that story in just a few sentences, it would be somehow, in ways that I can't fathom or understand, God got the ball rolling. And as a result of that, I've been blessed with this gift called life. And the whole program is a gift. And all that's left for me to do is respond to that gift and say thank you by how I choose to live my life. And I do that by trying to follow the way of Jesus. And so at the most basic level, faith for me is all about gratitude and responding to this incredible gift of life. And that's why if someone were to come to worship with us at the community church of Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, they would never attend a service without a prayer at some stage of the game being, Lord, thank you for the gift of life. And so the gratitude piece is absolutely central to at least how I think about faith. There have been
Tom,
one other thing I'd like. Go ahead, please, Matt.
So we practice different gratitude exercises in class at school, and and I geeked out on this one time. I was talking about, just joking around with students and kind of being eccentric, and I was looking out the window and the sun was shining in, and I said to my students, do you all realize how we just take for granted the fact that there is this star that is burning just the right distance from this planet, that has just the right conditions to support life, that, like all these things, and we just think like, oh, that's the sun. We just look out the window and we just think like, oh, but when we think about the vastness of the universe and how much dead space there is, the fact that we're on this little piece of stone covered in some water that supports just the right conditions for all of us to be here is beyond miraculous. So I was just riffing on this in class one day, and so I went home and I started thinking about what are the odds of being born as yourself, right? And so there's an old Indian parable where it says it's so unique to be born a human being that it's like a single turtle in all the world's oceans popping its head up through the surface, and when it does it, there's one little raft, and it pops its head up through that raft. That's how unique it is. So this mathematician a couple years ago calculated the total surface area of the ocean, the size of a turtle, the size of a raft, and went through probability, and it's 1 in 700 trillion that would happen, right?
1 in 700 what? Trillion?
Trillion. So then they went and they looked at the probability of your parents meeting and your parents' parents meeting and all this stuff, right? And they came up with this calculation that you being born as yourself is like 2.5 million people the size of San Diego, and every person has a trillion-sided dice. And 2.5 million people roll the trillion-sided dice, and they all get the same score. So it's like statistically virtually impossible, and that's what this mathematician calculated, that it's really damn special to be born you. And we take the givenness of our lives for granted. And again, we have this negativity bias where we're constantly preoccupied with the myriad ways in which reality fails to meet our expectations. And when we stop for a moment and we think about the impossibility of being here as ourselves, that we basically all are the winning universal cosmic lottery ticket, every single one of us. And we wake up every morning without that level of appreciation or that recognition of how special it is to be here. And I'll just say one last thing. I'm rambling here, but this is what I do, right? I say to my students,
We love you.
I say to my students, think about the successful chain of people who had to live long enough and escape ice ages and predators and accidents and diseases, etc., to successfully get to an age to reproduce, to lead to you. Think of the unbroken chain of people going back into the beginnings of history that had to successfully navigate all these things in order for your genes to be here as you right now. And just shifting your perspective like that, again, it elicits gratitude. And so at the heart of gratitude, I guess, is a shift of perspective where you take the givenness of your life and you question it and you examine it and you realize, again, that it could be otherwise, that in fact, statistically speaking, it should be otherwise. And the fact that you are here is pretty miraculous. All right, it's my soapbox.
Matt's soapbox. We'll wrap up with that and one final thought. Excuse me. I think it bears mentioning the research done by Emmons and McCullough, that people who are familiar with gratitude know about this. They found that people who consciously focus on gratitude experience greater emotional well-being and physical health than those people who don't. And there's an incredible list of benefits that they realized. These people felt better about their lives as a whole. They experienced greater levels of joy and happiness. They felt optimistic about the future. People who had a sense of gratitude in their lives got sick less often, exercised more regularly, had more energy, enthusiasm, determination, and focus, made greater progress towards achieving important personal goals. The list goes on and on. They enjoyed closer family ties. They felt stronger during trying times. And so I guess the bottom line is this notion of gratitude in our lives is so important, to have the awareness of what's going on, and that the good things that happen to us, or just even the gift of life itself, happens not just because of us, but because of things happening outside us. And even in funky times like we're living in right now, there remains so much to be grateful for. Sean or Matt, a closing word?
I am stuck on the trillion-sided dice and imagining a craps game with Matt at the other end of the table. So that's all I have to say.
Maybe that's our next spirited take.
Live from Las Vegas, a spirited take.
Sean? Thank you very much. Matthew, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you again the next time on A Spirited Take.